The heat was stifling in August of 1998, and residents of the small town of Brookhaven, Mississippi, were looking forward to a bit of relief. But their hopes were dashed when a local woman disappeared without a trace. Investigators did everything they could to find her, but no matter how hard they looked, they couldn't turn up any leads. The case eventually went cold, and the investigators had to file it away. But there was one problem. Even after all this time, they still don't know what happened to her, and they never found her body. The gas was still in the tank, and her purse, cell phone, and work ID badge were all inside the vehicle. It was almost like she got into another car and just drove off. Except no one saw her get into any cars that day. They received an anonymous tip that led them to a gravel pit in Lincoln County. According to the tipster, Heather's body was buried in the gravel pit. The police searched the area but couldn't find anything. There was no evidence of foul play, and she left behind a cell phone, which she never did. They hoped that releasing the reconstruction to the public would generate new tips, and it worked. One of them had red hair and was about 6'2", while the other man was shorter with brown hair. Unfortunately, the tipster didn't provide any names, and the police weren't able to track down either man. A couple of weeks later, an anonymous tipster contacted the police and told them that Heather had been in the company of two men in the days leading up to her disappearance. The cadaver dog started acting strangely, and the ground-penetrating radar revealed something unusual beneath the surface. The police brought in heavy machinery to dig up the site and see what they could find. Still, they continued to follow every lead, no matter how small. The police never ended up solving this mystery, and they still don't know what happened to Heather. The case remains open to this day. They tracked down people who used to work with Heather at the grocery store. To this day, they wonder if they'll ever learn the identity of the two men. Why else would they come forward and tell the police where Heather's body was? If Heather's killers were trying to hide her body in a gravel pit, they clearly knew their way around the area. I can't help but feel that the police are wasting their time pursuing dead ends like this. The only way they've now solved this case is by finding the two men and bringing them in for questioning. Maybe they felt comfortable in that particular location and thought the police wouldn't look there. Only someone involved in her disappearance would know that she was buried there. But why did they tip off the police? And they learned that she had recently started taking a medication called Prozac, which is used to treat depression. At the time, investigators wanted to question everyone who knew Heather to see if they had any information about her disappearance. There were plenty of composite sketches of criminals on TV shows like America's Most Wanted, but this was rare at the time. Unfortunately, there's a good chance that the men got away with murder. That still leaves us with two theories. Either Heather ran away with those two men, or they kidnapped and murdered her. But if they did kidnap and murder her, why did they wait so long to bury her body? And don't forget to stay tuned for more content. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day. But now they were also interested in finding these two men. And on October 24, 2001, they uncovered Heather's remains. They wondered if she might have been having problems in her personal life that she didn't talk about at work. But the deeper they dug, the more they realized that Heather was a normal teenager who was loved by her friends and family. So the police believed that she probably ran off with someone voluntarily. What did they find that haunts them even today? Welcome back. I'm here. As the weeks went by, the police continued searching for Heather, but they came up empty. Eventually the case went cold and the police had to put it on the back burner. But occasionally they would revisit the case and try to dig up new leads. Today, we read on. Look at the haunting mystery of a missing girl who vanished without a trace 23 years ago. In that conversation, she told him that she was going to her friend's house, which was located on Old Kingston Road near the railroad tracks. But Heather never showed up at her friend's house and nobody saw her again. The medical examiner estimated that she had been dead for about 2 years, which matched up with the timeline of her disappearance. After all, her body was found buried in a shallow grave, which suggested that whoever killed her tried to hide her body. But they still had very few leads. Heather's body was sent to the Mississippi Crime Lab to be examined, but it was too decomposed for an autopsy to reveal anything useful. But the mystery didn't end there. For 2 whole days, Heather was unheard from, and her family didn't think much of it, because she was known to go off on her own for days at a time. Her name was 19-year-old Heather Sue Morris, and she lived with her parents and her 4 siblings in Brookhaven, Mississippi. On August 6, 1998, Heather called her family home after work at around 4:30 p.m. She was working at the Piggly Wiggly supermarket where she worked as a clerk, and according to her family, she sounded fine when they spoke. At some point after hanging up the phone, Heather made a phone call to her boyfriend, whose name was Chris Brown. On August 8, though, when she hadn't returned home yet, they began to worry. At around 7:30 p.m., Heather's mother, Deborah, called the police to report her missing. When the local police began investigating, They learned that Heather had been seen at her workplace, but after she left work, nobody had seen her. This is important because Heather would have had to walk along Old Kingston Road to get to her friend S house, and the police checked everywhere, but they couldn't find a single person who had seen her. Even more strangely, Heather's car was found abandoned on the side of the road not far from her workplace. But why would she leave her car behind? In 2001, 3 years after Heather's disappearance, they finally got a break. 1 month later, the police returned to the gravel pit with cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar equipment. This time they found something. Heather was identified using dental records since her body had begun to decompose, and they could unuse fingerprints or facial recognition. After they found her body, the police continued to investigate what happened to her. Investigators decided to take another approach and bring in a forensic artist to create a reconstruction of what Heather looked like at the time of her death. The men were described as white and in their early 20s. According to the tipster, these 2 men were acquaintances of Heather S., and they knew her from hanging out at a local pool hall. They put out a composite sketch of each man in hopes that someone would recognize them and come forward. But once again, they didn't get anywhere, and the police felt that the sketches weren't good enough to accurately represent the 2 men. This seemed odd to the police because Heather was only 19 years old and generally enjoyed life. There was no reason for her to take her own life and no one she had recently argued with. It took them nearly 3 years to bring her out to the gravel pit and bury her. As for the 2 men, the police never even learned their names and they never managed to track them down. If you ask me, I think the 2 men know something. Maybe they felt guilty and wanted to confess. Or maybe they just wanted to make sure the police knew that she was dead. I wonder why they chose to bury her in a shallow grave instead of just leaving her there in the open. But after all this time, it seems unlikely that they'll ever be caught. Now it's time to hear from you. What do you think happened to Heather? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.